Alright, I'm back. This is part 3 of 2, if we want to put it that way. And I am going on a little bit about interpreting the data, so I guess it's good to give you a little break and to let you process this, because I want you to process it. I want you to look at the data, and I want you to see things like, oh, women's room is on the other side of the building. The other thing that I noticed about this is that there were lots of infections in the paper, and only a few were reported to have died. That's because most of the cases were working age, average age 40 years old. They reported the average age in the Korean call center of being about 40. They didn't report any deaths. I may have missed it. If I did, please point it out, because I want to see where these things are. Choir of 60 people. 2 people died. That's a huge percentage. Then I looked at the average age, 67. The upper age was about 80. Those are the high-risk categories for the virus to kill people. And again, I don't want to use this to minimize anything. Death is not the only bad thing that happens with this virus. But death is what we have the numbers for. I don't have numbers yet about all the weird things, and I'm sure the virus is doing weird, crazy things. We need to avoid it. But the question is, do we need to avoid it like the plague? Is it the plague? Or do we need to avoid it the best we can while managing other demands? The one thing I'm afraid of is I'm afraid that my interpretation of the data is going to be taken politically. And I've already seen signs of this. You think you can tell how someone votes by the way they interpret the science. And honestly, that's a shame. It's being exploited by by America's enemies on Twitter. And so it's being exploited by the enemies of us all. You know, this disease is the enemy. But other people are trying to use it for their own way. And there are people who are trying to politicize it. So I don't want to minimize this disease at all. And I want to give everyone the freedom. If you feel that you are at high risk, I don't want you to be worried about how you're going to eat. I don't want you to be worried about your debts. And so we need, from a Christian standpoint, we need to have some kind of personal jubilee practices is the way I want to do it. If you think you can tell how I'm going to vote from the way I interpret data, let me just say that you can't. Okay? And I just want to interpret the data the best I can. If you have a counter-argument that's based on the data, let's talk about it. Let's make sure that it involves all the data. And I just want to say, in this very good study, it has enough detail that we can see things in it that we might not have seen otherwise. I want to say a picture is not worth 1,000 words, but a graph is. And so you have all these pictures of outdoor places that look scary, and it looks like all those people are going to catch it, and 1% of them are going to die. So if you have a picture of 100 people, you might have the image that one of them is going to die soon. Even if the Chinese outdoor transmission statistics are true, you need a picture of 500 people in whatever the conditions were that transmitted the disease, which I don't know what they were, to have one case of transmission. And remember that transmission is probably a 0.7% chance of death overall. Again, that's a high number, but it's not a certainty that all those people are going to pay for being outside. We've got to look at these things, and so I don't want you showing me a picture of people outside and saying that this is evidence that no one should go outside. It's not. A Chinese study that I quoted, that's what I want to deal with evidence. And also, by the way, please don't forward me a video making a scientific argument. That's on the other side of the spectrum from what we've talked about with the people forwarding the pictures of all the people together and saying this is so terrible. People are forwarding me a video. I don't do video arguments just as a rule. And so the reason for that is the video can be manipulated in ways that the data cannot. Even the data can be manipulated and spun, right? But it's much, much easier to manipulate a video. And so I have my own context for who I trust in the scientific community. I can say that some of these videos are from people that 10 years ago I knew I did not trust this person because I didn't trust their science. That's what I'm trying to build my opinions on. It's not completely spin-free, but at least it helps to remove some of the spin, to put a little friction on the spin that's going on. So, video evidence and picture evidence are to me two sides of the same coin. Honestly, I'd much rather have picture evidence because at least that says something that's honestly more real than the video evidence, because some of those people very possibly could be transmitting the virus. But please don't interpret the picture without knowing the statistics for transmission. The other thing is, when I look at this, a lot of people are saying, oh, there's going to be hotspots in Georgia. There's not a hotspot in Georgia yet. There's not a hotspot in Florida. They opened the beaches a couple of weeks ago, right? But I'm saying beaches are safe, and it looks to me like the data are mostly holding up with that. In fact, currently there's nothing in the U.S. that looks like a hotspot like New York City was a hotspot. Everyone is muddling through. There might be warm spots. There probably are. But you can't find those by doing things like percentages. If you had 1 case this week and then you had 10 cases next week, oh my goodness, it's gone up by 1,000%. Percentages aren't the only thing that matters either. So all I've got to say is I'm trying to muddle through this data as well. Here is, you might have noticed that you haven't seen any drop-off graphs this time. Well, here's this site that can do a drop-off graph. If you feel like you need a drop-off graph, go to this site where I got them from in the first place. I just do my own slightly different version of it. This will show you that this I've zoomed in. And I've zoomed in past New York and New Jersey because they're way off this side of the graph. And you'll notice that there's a lot of things that are going up. Illinois was going up. Now it's possibly going down. Massachusetts was going up. It's going down. It looks like all of these states are muddling through. We have 2 success stories that stand out, Louisiana and Michigan. There's a number of success stories, by the way, that are cut off way down on the bottom of the graph this way because I wanted to be able to at least show you some of the names. And by the way, if you look at Washington, Washington's right in the middle of the graph. We're muddling along. This is cases. You can compare it to deaths on the site. The thing that you'll find is you won't see anything that's going up according to that dotted line consistently. Everything seems to be flattening out. And we need to take this into account. Now, this is with restrictions in place, but people are going to bring their own restrictions. And each of these states is approaching it differently. It makes it a real bear to be able to interpret these data. But you know your own state, look at your own state, find it on this graph, see how it's doing. If it's going down like Michigan or Louisiana, okay. If it's going up at a 45-degree angle, that's bad. If it's flat, well, that's neither good nor bad. And so we'll just keep an eye on these things. Georgia, in the way that they've opened up, has not gone crazy up. But at the same time, they've not gone down. We're all muddling through. And the whole point, the stated point of this COVID trends graph that they said at the beginning is they wanted to show how we're all in this together. And that's what this means. This is the flip side of we're all in this together. We are all muddling through together, and we're trying to figure out what to relax. From the data that I presented, there are some places that we can relax. Outdoor, especially. And we want to avoid prolonged outside of household contact. Because you got to live. You got to have contact with your household. Okay. So what I want to say is I want to get a clear thing about our goal. What is our goal with these? Is it to completely suppress the disease, or is it to mitigate it? Is it to sort of manage on and muddle through? We're mitigating. We are not suppressing. But I've never expected us to be able to suppress. There's a number of geographic, sociological, even legal issues in the U.S. that make suppression difficult. Is it realistic to expect us to suppress this like South Korea did? And South Korea did, and then they relaxed the bars, and then they had one person who went to the bars and infected like a dozen people. So I wonder if even South Korea can't effectively suppress this disease. Is it suppressible? Is it only mitigatable? We need to talk about this. And we need to realize that I'm not saying this from a political standpoint. I'm saying this from a practical scientific standpoint for a disease that is droplet transmission, R naught of 3, prolonged face-to-face exposure is what causes it. So part of mitigation is keeping an eye on the hospitals. I showed you the hospital graph in the last part. Washington hospitals are not overrun. Actually, I'm more worried about the stories I'm hearing now of hospital employees being furloughed because we're not allowing elective surgeries. That does have a danger, that does have a risk, and that may cause cases to go up. But at some point, we are not going to be able to wait the year that it's going to take to get a vaccine. But there are other things that we can do. The other thing that, and I want to say on the cautionary side of things, something made New York City different. New York City was like, I compared it to Sweden. It's 10 to 20 times worse than Sweden for the younger people. That is huge at a data level. I need to see how that lines up with demographics, by the way. That might be explained by age demographics, but that's another story. Whatever it is, New York City was bad, and I want to say again how bad it was. But it's going down, and their positive rates are like ours now. We know that we have to be careful of something that happened in New York City and in Lombardy. We don't know what it is. So I want to turn this over in part to us. We have different states that are doing different things. And rather than rooting for our spin to succeed, to prove me right and vindicate me, I'm hoping that some of those places that are opening up, or I'm saying don't open up, I'm hoping they do okay. Because they'll prove me wrong. And that will be a good thing, because they'll be doing okay. They'll be muddling through. And also I want to avoid perfectionism. This virus will not allow us to be perfectionistic about it. The good news is our immune systems, in many cases, can take care of it. We don't know exactly what the triggers are for things like cytokine storms. The last thing I want to say is we have one case. The last time that we really faced something like this as a country was 1918. And of course they didn't have internet, they didn't have Netflix. Okay? They probably were itching to get out a lot faster. The quarantines were only able to last 6 weeks, consistently, across the country, before they had to let the people out. We can probably go a little longer now, but I wonder about what parts of life we are canceling for all of us. For the case of risks where we can take a more nuanced view of the risk and say things like, okay, we can actually do some things outside that are lower risk in transmission. Not zero, but lower, significantly lower. Honestly, I'll take a 0.2% chance of transmission relative to, as a percentage of all the cases, as outdoors was. To me, that rounds down to zero. But I realize that it's not zero. There was a case where it was transmitted outdoors. And we just, what we do with that is a matter of personal interpretation. And then we discuss. So this is my contribution to the discussion. There are social and spiritual costs of isolation. And I really worry. I've seen signs of that in my own family. Our kids are really online. But they are realizing that they're, even as much as can be done online, not everything can be done online. And if it's true, as we've seen in New York City, 9 deaths in the teenager area. In fact, if I look at those deaths might have all been in the 0 to 1 year category. We just don't know. It's possible that there were no deaths in the category, because the 0 to 1 year category, by the way, is higher risk. Okay? That's why I say 1 to 17 is extremely low risk. But we can feel a little safer about our kids. We've got to look at the data. We don't know how this is going to play out. And I don't even know exactly where herd immunity is. I've got a paper but I don't know how to do about it, because it is out of my field, and I don't want to be commenting on stuff that's out of my field. But there is a possibility that we are getting some reduced immunity in places like New York City. I don't want to use the word herd immunity, because that word has been spun and politicized. So as a scientist, I'm trying to avoid these spin landmines, but I am trying to look at the data, and I'm trying to say, I want to help you make your decision over whether there's personal risk. If you want to minimize your risk, go to places, and if you have to go to a place indoors, go to a place with high ceilings. Don't stay there for more than an hour. I think if you're in a place with high ceilings, with less than an hour, and not like talking to someone in the face with an unmasked face, okay? With an unveiled face, then I think that your risk is low. But I don't know. All I can do is I can pass this on, and then tell me what you think. Is there something I've missed here? Is there something that I am unconsciously spinning the wrong way? I realize that there's definitely something like that. But the thing with all of our spins, if we can minimize the friction and the judgment of assumptions that we take to everyone else, we can truly get through this together. If we are in this together, I think we want to get back to the data. So, sorry for the little sermon, but I think that we need to focus on mitigation rather than suppression. And so I want to keep asking, if we see cases go up, okay, I wish they weren't, but are the hospitals full? Are the patients in the ICUs full? Are people sticking around in the ICUs for weeks? We need to know that. And in Washington State, I can say the data is the hospitals are half what they were at the peak of this. So we aren't out of the woods yet. But we are half of the worst, for what that's worth. All right. Thanks for listening, for the both of you who have listened this far on the video. And if you do have questions for me, send me comments or questions if you're connected. Usually I like to connect on Facebook to friends, but I'm trying to open that up a little bit. I'm on Twitter. And let me know what you think about this, because I want to know what I'm missing. All right. All right, everyone, stay safe, but try not to fear too much about the low risks. And let's talk to each other about what those are.